Hey y'all, this is Chris Johnson of Living Waters Fly Fishing. Today we are doing an event that revolves solely around water and being ready to go fish in different situations. So a lot of tools that we're going to introduce you to today that will show you kind of how to prep for a trip, how to plan for a trip, how to know if a trip is safe or unsafe, how to look at when water levels rise and fall, and even just kind of read simple forecasts. So we're going to go through all of that, and I know there's going to be split screens and all that sort of good stuff. It'll be great. I think you'll get a really good handle on how we do what we do from a guiding perspective, and if we've got to kind of live our life by the forecast as anglers, how to know when you need to kind of pull the plug on a trip or whether or not you can tough it out and make it. And we'll kind of look at some comparisons of different water bodies and different ways to read them, different gauges, all that kind of stuff. So one of the impetuses behind this event really was kind of the recent floods that we had out in the Texas Hill Country and all throughout Central Texas. We had a lot of phone calls right after all that was over saying, is it safe to fish? Is it safe to fish? Is it safe to fish? Is the water good? Are the conditions right? And a whole realm of questions. And honestly, it was incremental. We understand that. But we also found a lot of people really didn't know how to do this for themselves. And that's no fault of their own. They just don't know what tools are available to us as anglers to make that happen. So I'm going to show you my first tool that I think is going to be the biggest, I would say, benefit to you as an angler. So hydromet, so it's LCRA's website. The link is right there. It's hydromet.lcra.org. And this right here is an overview of the Colorado River Basin. You can see there's the Llano, here's the Lake Buchanan Basin up here with, you've got the San Saba River and all that. So these are all sub-basins of the Colorado River all throughout. You'll see as I kind of hover over some of these numbers, different data comes up. Well, the main thing here is if I were to zoom out, and if it'll let me see if I can get all this to work. It may not on this one. Let me do this the old-fashioned way. If I zoom out, you can actually see the entirety of the state, or at least most of it there, and you'll see all these little water values all sprinkled throughout. Well, this tool here is just invaluable because I can go over here and I actually use hydrometric data for not just flow gauges and flow rates, I also use it for current Doppler radar. So there's not a lot on the radar right now, but if we were to zoom out, you can see that we actually have a little bit down here towards Houston and all that sort of stuff. If you were to hit radar loop right here, this little check mark on the left, if you were to hit that, you'll actually begin to see it load up and actually do the time lapse of any sort of radar. The thing that I like about this is that if I were to zoom in any of these spots, if I'm on the river, say I'm fishing this river right here. So say I'm working on that, I can tell if I was right here in this bend, I know I'm about to get walloped. And that's exactly it, is I can actually overlay this radar with rivers and basins and even flow gauges to where I can kind of track some of that as it enters into our area up here in the hill country. So Hydromet is a huge resource, and for other references as well, you can go over here and all these little boxes on the left, they're just different tools. So I can turn off the radar and the loop as well and go into county boundaries, and it throws our, there's Williamson County where we're at right here, throws those county boundaries, lets me know when storms are going to enter or exit. And then in addition to that, you can also look up drought monitoring as well, where it will show you where we're in, moderate drought, incremental drought, and it has all of that labeled here, ready for you to go. So you can see that obviously, just south of the Medina and all that stuff there, that's, gosh, I think you're still touching Seco Creek there, Hondo, all that. So you're looking at, there's a lot of stuff out there. The Sabinal River right on the edge of it as well, the Nueces and Frio. A lot of that's still in, pretty major drought stage or just a little bit outside of it. Thankfully, we've had enough rain up here that it's starting to, abate those issues. So you can look at that. There's watersheds, and you can turn all of this stuff off just by clicking that. And this can become kind of a little bit more rudimentary map depending on what you, activate and deactivate. The other thing you can do here is these tabs up here, and this is something that I look for when I fish. If I go here and it says Hydromet data, if you go here and click this, there's stream flow, there's gauge height, there's lake levels, and then there's rainfall. So if we were to go down to rainfall, I can do this all the way into previous years. I can do this over the past week, past 2 weeks. So let's just do past 2 weeks right here. And you'll see all the rainfall monitors. So you'll look at this, and I mean, let's actually narrow this down just a little bit more. Let's do just a past, let's do like past 3 days. There's been very much largely no rain at all, trace amounts. But if you go outside of that and you look at that, let's go up to like a week, Now you can start to see that we had rain prior to that. So that lets me know within a 7-day window, we've had, 3 inches, almost 4 inches of rain out here. So if we were to zoom into where these stations are, you'll look at this fell in Crabapple Creek right here, kind of north of Fredericksburg. That all drains over here into Lake LBJ. So that whole Sandy Creek complex, everything like that. So there was some concentrated rainfall here. Again, not something that's overly publicly accessible, but if any of these creeks that feed, the Llano River or the San Saba, any of that. So for instance, here's the North Llano right here where I'm kind of hovering now, and the South Llano River. Well, looky here, it's South Llano River. They had 2 inches here, but they had almost 4 up here, kind of on one of these tributaries to the South Llano. That's enough that it may discolor water or throw it off, and we need to look at flow gauges. So if we were to do that, we would then click stream flow. We look here and at junction, if I click this gauge, it shows me everything I need to see here from spikes in water flow, which if we look, guess where that kind of overlays? Almost exactly when that rainfall happened. It didn't bring it up more than about 40 cubic feet a second, but it did bring it up, which lets you know the water was more than likely off color during that little event. So just things that you can look at to see when should I and when should I not go. But the hydrometric data website, I wish every river authority had one that was this robust. And I know that obviously LCRA's got a hefty budget for some of this, but to be able to look at watersheds and how they relate and look at, stream gauges and their flows up and down. If we click the Colorado River at San Saba, you go to past 14 days, you can see there's a couple of flow aberrations here where, little bits of rainfall, but nothing major. If you look at this when it's at a flood stage, you will see, it actually gives that action stage and flood stage reading here, and that shows up on this graph as well. So something to note when you are checking water and river conditions. Now, how high is too high? And that's one of the questions we get a lot. So in the Llano right now, it's at 79 cubic feet a second. If you look back here, there was a rain event that threw it a little over 900, almost 1,000 CFS. So you're looking at, let me see if it touched 1,000. Oh, right there, I saw it, right? Let me scroll over. 1,001 was its peak right there. So right at the top, we got just right at 1,000 CFS. That is obviously too much water for any sort of wading angler. But that being said, we do need to look at things like this to be able to tell, what are we up against on a regular basis? Are we going to see flow rates that are unsafe for wading? Well, in Llano, anything over about 250 to 300, somewhere in there, that's going to, potentially be unsafe for wading in certain stretches of the river. Others, it might be okay. If it's like the broader, more flat sections down here, you can wade stuff in that realm pretty easily. But I'm looking at kind of the average to lower average wader. If you have capable waders that know how to navigate bigger water like that, it wouldn't be a deal killer if you were working the margins or edges of a river. 131 in Mason, that's a blast. What a great place to float right now. You look at the South and North Llano and even just right below town at 83, all these are perfectly safe conditions. So, are there thresholds and things like that? Yes. How do you know? You go and find out. Everybody's capability is different. When you're wading, my comfort level may not be your comfort level. So I'm very careful to throw out numbers like 260 to 300. I've waded the Llano with that. It's doable, but if you're not a confident wader, and especially if you're in rocky environments versus the sandy stuff on the lower river, that can actually be a little bit sketchy depending on your confidence level of a wader. So I would be very careful when you do this to, maybe go out at 100 CFS, see how you feel. When it's up to 150, check it out. Go multiple times and see what your thresholds are. And again, Brushy Creek, I've waded parts of Brushy Creek at 260 CFS. I will never do that again. That was very unsafe and it wasn't smart. Did I do it? Did I make it out alive? Yes. Could I have waded back up to my car had I not bailed out? Probably not easily. So there's just some places that you have to know your thresholds and know what you're capable of. And most importantly, don't take unnecessary risks. Again, it's just fishing. So just something to look at there. But with the hydrometric site, it is a great resource and I highly advocate that you use it, whether it be for Doppler radar, whether it be for knowing where that's at in relationship to your county and all that sort of good stuff. The problem we run into is LCRA does exactly that. They monitor the Colorado River. So if you'll look, there's not a lot of information outside of those river boundaries. And that's where USGS comes in. And this is the National Water Dashboard. The National Water Dashboard, this is a very, very robust site, and I love this thing. This has been amazing. Pretty fresh site update. There's, you've got hydrology, base maps, weather conditions, all that. You've got gauging stations, all these different layers that you can play with over here. And I highly encourage you, get in there and use these tools and mess with them. I'm going to go and close that for now, and let's zoom in a little bit without hitting a gauge if I can. Let's go over here to Brushy Creek. Let's pull something out of the basin here. So all of these dots are color-coded. So if you'll look, here it says that it's increasing. Brushy Creek is on the rise. This says it's remaining steady. So if we were to look at Kinney Fort, it's at 12.9 cubic feet per second. That's very, very low for Brushy Creek. And it also says remaining steady. If we go up here to Round Rock, it's at 27 cubic feet a second and currently increasing at 9 cubic feet per hour. And so if we click this gauge, it brings up a whole nother table, at least it should, and it's got to load for a second, that's a lot of data. But it brings up a whole separate table that should bring up, graphs and details and things like that. So exactly, now we can see where there's been flow spikes, where there's aberrations. You can do that by gauge height right here at the highlighted tab. You can also look at stream water elevation. You can look at discharge, which is measured in cubic feet per second. I tend to think that for most folks, anything over about 100 CFS in Brushy is really sketchy for most folks. In the lower river, there's some exceptions to that. But for the most part, I would say anything over 100's pretty much out. I think most people start struggling when they get like 80-ish, somewhere in there. But right now where we're at 27 is beautiful. It's absolutely perfect. It's great. If you follow, I think this is a really good point here. Let's do this. This is super fun, and I use this way a lot. So this hopefully demystifies this. If we look at this and scroll over, it's at 27 cubic foot a second. The South Fork of Brushy Creek, which runs right here where my cursor is scrolling, that's Brushy Creek Lake right there. You'll notice there is not a flow gauge anywhere on this. How much is the South Fork flowing versus the north? Well, if the north is running approximately 10 cubic feet a second, you can imagine that this is probably running between 15 and 17, somewhere in there, because it's making up the rest of that 27. So obviously you're going to have feeder creeks. You can see that there's a few more that enter here that are going to contribute to that number. But it's pretty safe to say that this is probably somewhere around the 15 cubic foot per second mark, even though we don't have a gauge on it. So by using these gauges, so let's just say that the North Fork of Brushy Creek, say that they got a ton of water up in Leander, and it just came roaring down the North Fork of Brushy Creek. Let's say this gauge was at 200 CFS, but the gauge right here was at 220. Well, then you can assume that this is still fishable at 20 CFS on the South Fork. Just that process of elimination, I find a lot of people don't do that when it comes down to reading these gauges. Now, if you'll look, some of these are color-coded. And you'll see that on that, and I don't know if that's going to show up perfectly on screen. Hopefully, if you're full screening this, you can see everything. But it should show up as on the very bottom, it says above normal for this day of the year, remaining steady. And it's reading at 19 cubic feet a second. If you look at the green ones, it says normal for this day of year. Blue is above normal. And then if you look at red, I can scroll down here and show you this. It says much below normal for this day of year. So there's comparisons over time. And I like that on these gauges, that the green ones and the blue ones are what you're looking for. And then, white is normally just remaining steady. Sometimes it doesn't factor in those yearly monitors as well. But I mean, Canyon Lake, normal for this day of year, flowing almost 100 cubic feet a second. We're at 118 going into the lake. So all of that is very, very helpful because it also lets you know that, what it's flowing is probably something you're pretty used to seeing. If we drop down into San Marcos, at the San Marcos, it's running 101 cubic feet a second. It says that's below normal for this day of the year. Again, totally fishable, totally floatable. If you go down here, it's at 107 down in Martindale. So not really losing all that much in the course of everything. So really, really great resource. And I use the National Water Dashboard a lot. The other thing that's very helpful about this is it is not just the state of Texas. When I travel the Mountain West, I have a lot more going on out here. So if I'm monitoring snowmelt or looking at drought conditions to see if I want to hike back into certain water, I want to make sure that it's not, in major drought stage. So a lot of y'all know that I go to the Rio Grande up near South Fork quite a bit. You can look, a lot of this stuff is below normal or in drought stage right now, where it says much below normal for this day of year. So just things to look at, things to monitor. through that. I think that's just a very, very great resource for flow gauges. Now, how do we interpret that? So flowing water, it's measured in gauge height, which that's one thing. There's also water elevation, where it's actually, your elevation above sea level. You can see that as well. But there's also the premise of like cubic feet per second, and that's discharge rate. And that's what we typically refer to when we're talking about 100 CFS, 150 CFS, 4,000 CFS. What is that? What is a cubic foot of water passing a single point at one given second? So, I mean, you think about what that is, it's about like this. So if you're looking at that, just a little box of water about like that, it's that passing that. But then there's also the principle of velocity. And so there's volume and velocity. So if you look at volume, that's the amount of water. Velocity is sometimes the speed at which it's going. So obviously those two tend to coincide very well. But you look at, take 100 CFS in the Guadalupe River versus 100 CFS in, parts of the Llano that are very broad, wide, open, and shallow. That 100 CFS is spread across a lot more area than where it pinches in the Guadalupe into a rapid. So that velocity going down that 100 CFS is going to be a lot higher. That 100 CFS in the Llano is going to be very wadeable, very easy. So you have to look at this as 100 CFS in Brushy Creek versus 100 CFS on the Llano. Very different things based on river size, bottom composition, whether it's channelized, whether it's spread out over a larger apron and over the substrate. Those are things that we look at. So if you say 100 CFS on the Llano, let's go. If you say 100 CFS on Brushy Creek, I'm like, I'll probably still go, but I got to be careful. Especially in the western side, got to be really careful. As you head east, it's not too bad because it opens up and spreads out. If you're in the west, the creek is very channelized, very narrow. 100 CFS on, like, say, the north or the south fork of Brushy is pretty much almost unfishable. You're limited to fishing just side, little, out of current pockets, and that's about it. They wouldn't even be worth your time. So looking at that, that's very important. Also to note on this, you will see that on the national water data, the dashboard there, it does have a Doppler radar feature as well. And here we are on the Cimarron. You can see that that's falling right there in that river basin. You can trace that directly to where you're at. So I do love that. There's so many more tools that go along with this that are just absolutely valuable to us as anglers. And anytime we're traveling, we look at that as well. So again, on these, your zoom in, zoom out. I'm used to using the right cursor, as you can tell. But nonetheless, when we're doing this, you can monitor the entire state. Every one of those dots that you see here is a river gauge with year-over-year data and just historical information that's very, very helpful. The Llano, normal for this day of year. The north is above normal for this day of year. All these are just great, great things to note. And these graphs look quite a bit different than they did a few months ago. So just something to look at and observe when you are doing this. Now, other tools. Flow gauge is one. So how do we interpret flow? It's measured in cubic foot a second. You need to go to a river and kind of establish a baseline of comfort. I mean, we can tell you what we would recommend. If you ask us a question saying, hey, is it safe? Sure, we'll tell you. But it's a really good idea to start kind of formulating that for yourself. Like for me, like I told you, Brushy Creek at 100 CFS, I'm probably going to get people to shy away from the stuff that's, 35 and west. East, if I have a confident wader or if the water's clear, we might attempt it, especially down towards Hutto. I wouldn't have a problem with that. But it is a pretty healthy head of water on Brushy Creek, something that's very narrow and channelized. The Llano, you barely notice it at 100 CFS. It's full, but it's not bad. It's very easily navigated, and you can float it as well in some sections. So getting those baselines and knowing how those relate, that's really important, and that's something that you're going to have to establish as the angler individually. I know what I'm confident wading in. You might look at that for yourself and go, do I want to do this? Do I ever feel unsafe? And if you're unsafe, don't do it. It's not worth your life. I mean, I just quoted him earlier today, Bill Higdon, a guy that sadly we have lost, but he was a very good friend of mine. And he put it very, very plainly. He goes, it's just fishing. And so while I know we love this, we eat, sleep, and breathe it, it's just fishing. So don't risk things unnecessarily that don't need to be risked. So looking at all these tools, very, very important to help you assess the situation. To move on here, if you were to look at what we use for weather, this is so important. So I look at NOAA, so NOAA.gov, so National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, And if you're going to do this, you can just type in your zip code. So for here on that little upper right corner, type in your zip code, and here's all your options. Click Round Rock, and then right here, this little button says See Full Local Forecast. This is great. I love this kind of stuff because for one, it's a very detailed 7-day forecast right here. So I mean, it's something in that wheelhouse. I think it's 7-day if I remember correctly. But that right there this is what we eat, sleep, breathe, and live and die from on the guide front, is where we're looking at highs and lows. We are also going to look down here at long-term weather trends. We want to make sure that, they are consistent, that we are seeing, if there's any sort of cold front coming in, how to interpret that, and making sure that if we have rain, knowing that if it's going to be a gully washer 3 days before we go, that river could still be in a state of, it could still be blown, and we don't necessarily want that. We don't want that river blown out if we're going to be there and fish in off-colored water, especially in the hill country where off-colored water doesn't really do you any favors if it's going to be, muddy or really dingy. So this is great, but the real power of NOAA is this, and that is down here in this fine print section, right below all the little forecast stuff. It says hourly weather forecast. If you click that, boom, here we go. This is amazing. This is where you can track a forecast hour by hour. There's heat indexes, there's wind chills in the winter. You can look here at the wind, and it will tell you when it's supposed to shift. So if you're trying to, beat frontal conditions or stay behind them, whatever you're trying to do, it will help you see that in an hour by hour standpoint on this gauge. Now the difference here is this is going to point to the direction the wind is blowing from. And I don't know if y'all know how to read this, but, and I don't know, I might be able to zoom in on this. Yeah, here we go, that helps. So here you can see that you've got 6 miles an hour, it's coming out of the southeast. So that's pointing to the direction the wind is blowing from, unlike a windsock that's going to be pointing the opposite way. So just be aware of that. This is always going to be pointing to where the wind is coming from. So it'll be coming out of the southeast at about 6 miles an hour. And if there were gusts, there would be another line, and it would actually have this color coded right there. So that's kind of what you're looking for there in that term. But this hourly forecast is amazing. You can also bounce forward a couple of days. There's that little tab there that says forward 2 days. And we don't have a whole lot of changes. You can see relative humidity factor. You can see all that. I don't know if we have a wind change in here at all. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. We got 1 day right there where you can see where it just really gets a little wacky, but only for a second, where they're showing just this real little spin around version there, and that's about it. And it's going to happen right there in the wee hours of Tuesday morning of next week is what they're calling. So, great tools to help you examine weather before you go, and looking at even being able to look ahead and go, man, am I going to hit this right or am I not? And I think a lot of people really get confused by this, but all we're looking at when we look at guide trips, I'm looking at weather forecasts, I'm looking at a little bit of rainfall history, and I'm watching flow gauges. That's pretty much it. Wind, I'm okay with it. I mean, I've got a tool on here for that too, but if it's windy, I'm just gonna go. I mean, unless it's like blowing 50 and I won't do it. But if it's 30 miles an hour, that's not fun. But if you're in a creek, you don't know. It's blowing right over the top of you. If you're on some of our bigger rivers, that may not be your best choice. So just kind of think about that in ways that you can relate to the water bodies that you fish on personally. The other thing I love about NOAA, and I'm gonna get back to this screen here, and I'll switch back over for you guys. Let me see if I can get all the way out of this. We did a lot right there. Here we go. So they obviously have radar and satellite images and all that sort of good stuff. But there is one thing that I really love about this, and this is, let's do this. This is really fun. I can show you this. I think this is probably a better example. We do a lot of work. I'm actually headed to South Fork, Colorado, and that's provided I can get this all entered in. South Fork, Colorado, I must have did something wrong. There it is. Okay, let's see here. It says out of Del Norte. Forecast out of Pueblo. So this is extended forecast for South Fork, Colorado. Currently, it is 71 degrees and pretty high chance of rain for the next couple of days. Man, that's going to be cold when I get up there. I'm going to get up there Monday night. So this will be the night before is going to be 34, and it's going to be freezing the night before that just about. Going to be chilly. Here is the thing that's interesting. That's going to be the forecast for roughly 8,200 feet of elevation. If you're in the mountains and you intend to go hike up high, so let's look at this map right here. So this kind of pale green map. If we were to zoom in on this, and you can zoom in wherever you want, and there's all kinds of data here. Let's see, this is Alberta Park, there's Wolf Creek Pass. Let's take kind of this up here. This is real tall stuff here. This is as you kind of come over the pass there. Let's look at just like one of the overlooks here. Let's do that. If you click that, it then brings up a different forecast They've even got a slight chance of snow in there Saturday night. And you'll notice your highs aren't nearly as high. Your lows are still pretty low, but your highs aren't getting up to that 70 degrees. It's only getting up in the 50s. So that stuff there, if you look at the elevation, here it changed. And you can see that right there above the 48-degree mark. You should be able to see that. So right here, what I have highlighted, you can see the elevation. This is measuring from, that Wolf Creek Pass area, that latitude, that longitude. It actually pinpoints your forecast based on where you're going. This is very important because if I go back down here to South Fork and look on the valley floor, look at what that's now. We're now sitting around 8,000 feet with a different latitude, longitude, and our forecast is rainy, but our highs are up in the 60s and 70s versus, 50s. Which that is a very different layer of clothing. So, especially if there's a chance of snow for us Southerners. So just be aware that this has the ability to pinpoint a forecast based on elevation. And that is something that I think a lot of people miss when they travel, is they just go look at the town that they're staying in, not where they're gonna go drive up to. And you can get as detailed as you want on this. I mean, like Del Norte Peak here, that mountain is over 12,000, and let me go back here. Yeah, a little bit different there. Chances of snow on Saturday. Yeah, I mean, just a little bit of movement on that map changes a lot where you come off those peaks. So you can zoom into some of this stuff and look at that, but the further back you get in some of the higher peaks here, you'll see that those forecasts will change based on those pinpoints. Are they 100% accurate? No, it's weather, for goodness sakes. You're going to have a lot of instances where this isn't going to be 100% right. One thing I will say is that over the years, and a lot of guiding under my belt, NOAA is the most consistent forecast I have ever read day in, day out. And so I don't use any of the weather apps and all that sort of stuff. I use NOAA and I pinpoint the forecast. I'm a little bit old-fashioned in that regard, I guess, but I like it and it works. And it's right more than it's wrong. And if it's wrong, we erred on the side of safety. That's all that is. I'm not going to have you go fish in lightning. So that is a great tool. Now, one thing that we do have to look at is these are only, roughly 7-day forecast or extended forecast. If you do something like Weather Channel, I'm going to call this kind of your, aside from all the ads that you get, which is garbage, but it is what it is. If you look here, this is for Round Rock. When you get down to a 10-day forecast, you start looking at all this stuff. 10-day forecasts are great and all, but these are just averages for the most part. So it's going to show you trends and averages, but it's saying right now that we're going to have a wind shift. It's going to, come out of here, do that. We got a little chance of rain there. Nobody really knows that. Those are just averages. One hurricane can change the whole dadgum thing. Just be aware that if you're looking at trends, sometimes that 10-day will help you get your mind around it a little better, especially when planning to go out in the hill country or something like that. In fact, a perfect example, Emily and I this spring, we're going to go out and we were going to go fish the Medina and the Llano and a bunch of other really great rivers out west. And we're going to take about 3 days. We're going to do our spring excursion. I booked the hotel. I always book my hotels refundable if possible. And so I booked the hotel, had everything good, and we had one of those just insane heat waves come through that we were like at 80-degree highs or 85-degree highs, something like that. And it spiked up to like 107 or something like that. It was just that weird like week-long heat event that we had this spring. And it dropped right down immediately after. So I literally told her, I was like, if it's all the same to you, I'm going to cancel this and we're going to delay this a couple of weeks and let this level out. Wound up hitting it when a front came through. Our high was like 87. It was amazing. So, making those calls and being able to go, yeah, that's not looking like it's going to fall real well or what we're doing. You watch it as it comes in and plan accordingly. So just knowing that, if you have the flexibility to do that, it's very, very helpful. And for most of us, if we're just going on a weekend or something like that, it's pretty easy to go, yeah, maybe I'll lay off this weekend and maybe do some honeydews or something like that, and then go out and fish later. So just be aware that there are times that it's better to throw in the towel. All right, last tool that I think I'll mention here today is Wind Finder. And you can get this in app form. A lot of these things you can get. The National Water Data dashboard, if you'll look up USGS mobile water data, it's a kind of a mobile-friendly interface for that same stuff on the National Water Dashboard that we showed here. There's kind of a mobile-friendly interface as well. Wind Finder also has an app. So let's go into a little bit closer here into Round Rock. I like these little icons where they're zooming in like that, and you can see the little icons where it shows the direction of the wind and all that sort of good stuff. The cool part is that now you can go down here on these bottom tabs and look at forecast and see how that changes. So if we were to zoom out a little bit, you can see that now you can see the trend where the wind is curving upward. You can also switch this over to arrows if that is less confusing for you. I like the little particles, whatever they call those things. I just think it kind of helps you paint it all in perspective. If you zoom out, you'll see the color changes. Your little key is here on the left, that the more, the heavier winds are obviously going to change, color, just like a Doppler radar would. So you're going to see that get more to like red, orange, and things like that. You have these little call outs that kind of help you, look at some of the things that you're seeing here. And there's actually little stations. There's weather stations, spots with wave forecast and tide forecast. It's a great coastal tool if you're headed to the coast. You'll see precipitation measured by the hour. Pretty neat to see this stuff. I mean, there's more tools to do this now than we've ever had in our lives. And so there's no excuse for not being able to read these and to utilize these to help get the most out of the days you go to fish, and also do so safely. So how do we know how long it takes a stream to recover? Well, a lot of that comes into play of how severe. So let's just take an example. Let's take like the San Gabriel River. It had almost a 30-foot rise up in Georgetown. How long did it take to recover? Well, it took an awful long while because they were letting water out of the lake. So you saw Lake Georgetown was releasing water, so that was a constant flow out of the North Fork, and the South Fork is the one that flooded so incrementally. So when you look at that, that's kind of, you're having to look at different forks, you're having to look where they converge, you're having to look at volume. And then when the volume starts to fall, you have to look at that water did get churned up pretty good. So it's going to be murky or muddy. You have to look at how incremental was the flood. Something like that, it's easily going to take a week, 2 weeks, to kind of get back to its own. If it's just a little thunder shower or something like that that comes through and spikes it real quick, it might be 2-3 days on the short end. On brushy, if we have a pretty good flush, I normally say it's about 5 days. And that's about when you're back to, what we consider normal. Is it fishable before that? Absolutely. In many cases, that is that's normal, that about 3 days in, 2 days in, depending on the severity, it might be fishable. And sometimes that's when I like to go fish it, when the water's a little bit off color and the fish can't see my fly quite as well. I actually have a couple of places on brushy that when it's muddy and high, that's where I go, because I know the bass are going to pile up in there looking for bait fish. The best bass fishing I have of my year is sometimes on those spots, and sometimes I'm not even in the water. I have spots I can literally bank fish and have some of the best bass catches of my year for Guadalupe bass and numbers, literally standing on the bank. But I know they're going to be there, and I know when they're going to be there, and it's right after that rain shower. It's typically the second to third day after a big storm, and they push right up in it and start feeding relentlessly. So the catch rates are good. They can't see my fly real well. They're not nearly as picky. So the fish that would have refused me before the rainstorm are chowing down, and they've got the feed bags on. So knowing how to utilize those, I would say, kind of atypical weather conditions, where it's not your typical low clear or full clear water conditions. It's a little high, a little murky, and the fish are going to just switch, and something's going to fire that they're going to eat and get while the getting's good, because you can't see them, but also neither can their prey. So they're going to capitalize on those type of environments, those type of conditions. So just something to think about when we do this. If anybody's got any questions, I know we're doing this pre-recorded, but we will happily answer those in the comments, or if you need to call and chat or anything like that. But we just really wanted to go through how to know when water's safe, when it's not, what to look for as anglers. And again, we have so many great tools, and I am going to just kind of pop back to this one. Hydromet is just one of the absolute best tools you will ever have, with the ability to zoom in on this and literally switch your last 14 days. You can go to even your last 12 hours and see if there's been any change whatsoever. It just makes it so much easier for what we're doing as anglers to be able to make that happen. And I think that's something that we forget as anglers, is that all this stuff is available to us at all times. So just be aware that anytime we're doing this, we're looking at the same tools that you have access to. We might have a little bit more river knowledge behind us because we've done it for so long, but that doesn't mean that you can't go out. If you see a flow gauge that says it's at 1,000 CFS and you've never seen that, go drive out to the river and go look at it. Find a good place to eat along the way. Make it a fun trip. It's a learning experience. Go see what 500 CFS looks like on Brushy Creek. Go see what 1,000 CFS looks like on the Gabriel. Go reference those. Even if you take pictures of it, those are really great ways to go. When you see that gauge again go up to 200, you're like, oh, well, I could do that. That's not that bad. Or, if you see it go up to 500, go, should I? And so those are things to think about when you see that. I mean, and everybody's preference and capability is different. And so I'm never going to say do or don't do this at certain flows unless it's just incremental and stay out of the water. But please, use caution when you do this, but use these tools to help you assess the situation, really get ahead of your forecast and know when to pick your days and how to go and make the most of them. The one thing that we don't really have, and I'll see if I can get over to this here in NOAA, the one thing we don't really have to show is on these hourly graphs. Let me see if I can do this. This is now in South Fork, so you'll see, the temperatures. That'll show you the wind chill there in the blue line. That shows you your rain total. So I had to pick a different place that actually gets rain and not Texas. But this shows you your rain percentages and show when it's going to fall. And this is really cool because, like, if we were to zoom in here, this is on Friday. If you're going to fish first thing in the morning, you might actually stay out of most of the rain. It's really expected mostly in the afternoon. So we look at this, especially like on a half-day guide trip. Are we going to beat the storms, or are we going to, be in it all day? It even gives estimated rain totals. And it does the same thing for Texas. It's just we don't have any in the forecast right now to show you. So with this, it does this anywhere you want to go. All these data points are there. These are so useful for when we do this. And I think, the wind chill here as well, it might be 38 degrees. There's 36 with a wind chill of 29. That's chilly. I mean, there's no two ways about it. That wind's going to be blowing out of the northeast. So, and if you'll look, when it's really blowing, see how it's 15 miles an hour here, you'll have that little flag with a second stick on it. And so those wind graphs, they'll have little more fingers on those flags when you start seeing the wind go up in speed. But these are great tools for anyone to use and to have that data at their fingertips. So utilize these and really watch when you need to be there, and especially if you have inclemental fronts or wind conditions when you need to bail. Because knowing when you need to throw in the towel and get out of there means every bit as much as knowing when you need to be there. So just be aware of that. But those are some tools that you can put in your arsenal to really help you as an angler know when to fish and when to not fish. And that's equally as important. So again, any questions you have, we're happy to answer. Leave any questions in the comments, reach out to us directly. Hopefully this kind of enlightened you to some of the tools that are accessible to us as anglers. We use it as a guide service, we use it as a fly shop, I use it personally as an angler, and all of these. There's so many more. There's so many more tools out there. This is just a few that I use on the regular. So use them, enjoy them, click around a lot, explore them. The interfaces on them are just massive, much more than we have time to show here. So explore each of those, click around on them, have fun. If it's a slow day at the office, do something. But, it's really an incredible resource that we have as anglers in this, modern age, that we have all this stuff literally on your phone. So you can access any of this data real time on the water. We've never had that capability just even a couple decades ago. So it's pretty amazing to have this now. So utilize it, make the most of it, and get better fishing results as a result of using these tools. Thank y'all so much for watching. We'll see you on the water or see you in store. If you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank y'all so much for watching, and we'll see y'all soon.